Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all for this distinguished lecture series, the lecture series number 16 on energy efficiency for this month. We are indeed privileged to have Dr. Anshu Bharadwaj, Chief Executive Officer of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, to deliver the lecture today. Dr. Anshu Bharadwaj, as the Chief Executive Officer of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, has been working in terms of facilitating India's transition to a cleaner energy future. Under his leadership, SSEF is developing a great approach model in terms of design and implementation of policies that promote clean power, energy efficiency, sustainable urban transport, climate policy, and clean energy finance. Dr. Bharadwaj is a member of the Indian Administrative Services of 1992 batch and belongs to the Karnataka cadre and has extensive experience of working with the state government and in different capacities. Subsequent to leaving the Indian Administrative Service, Dr. Anshu Bharadwaj was Executive Director of the Center of Study of Science, Technology and Policy, CSTEP as it is called. He was responsible for establishing CSTEP as a leading technology policy think tank. CSTEP was extensively involved in the PAT program when it was being developed in its very initial stages. And Dr. Bharadwaj has expertise in technology and policy aspects of energy and environmental sectors, and this came in handy when the PAT program was being developed by Government of India and BEE. He has been a member of several government committees in the areas of energy and environment. Dr. Bharadwaj is an alumni of some of the best-known institutions of the world, the Carnegie Mellon University, USA, IIT Kanpur, and Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata. I have had the privilege of listening to Dr. Anshu Bharadwaj speaking as well as moderating some of the sessions with regard to energy and environment. I have always been amazed by his width of his understanding and the depth of the points which he has made. Without much further ado, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome Dr. Anshu Bharadwaj for this distinguished lecture series on energy efficiency. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Venkat Giri. Thank you very much. And I'm very grateful to you and to CII for this kind invitation to the series of which you have initiated on first Monday of every month. I must confess, when I got your email inviting me to give a lecture on energy efficiency, my initial reaction was to panic. And that's because, I'm not an expert in energy efficiency. I'm more of I know energy policy. I'm more of a jack of all trades in energy, but not an energy expert in energy efficiency as such. And when I saw the list of your previous speakers, my panic doubled. When I saw the likes of Dr. Ajay Mathur and Saurabh and Dr. Abhay Bakre, Mr. Naushad Forbes, then I was wondering that what is it that I can add to what my previous speakers have already said. So then when I planned my talk, I thought, let me bring to the perspective some thoughts which are general to energy efficiency, something which people often overlook, and to highlight the importance of some key sectors, what has been done in the past in energy efficiency, what has worked, what has not worked so well, and what are the challenges as we go forward. So that's how I thought I will structure my talk. I put together a few slides and I'll share with you. A lot of what I intend to share with you and present to you is based on material and work which has been done by Shakti's partner organizations in various projects. It was kind of you to remember PAT programs in which we actively participated in my previous position. And so I'll rely heavily on work done by Shakti's partner organizations. And I also express gratitude to my Shakti colleagues, Ritika, Vaishali, and Shubhashish, who helped me prepare for today's lecture. So let me try and project, I'll share my slides. Please let me know if you can see. Okay, can you see the? Okay, great. So, yeah. So the presentation is sort of broadly structured in three categories. One is why energy efficiency. Not that we all know why it's important, but I'll try to provide some new perspectives to why it is important.
You can put it on full screen, sir. It will be better.
Sure. This is okay? So why energy efficiency? Why is it important? And then I'll take a deep dive into two sectors and highlight some issues in industry and space cooling. Because I thought that these are very important areas and where a lot of future action is required as we go further. So why energy efficiency? Now, there are several reasons. The most important being that it is the main driver to achieve the NDC targets. Now, as you know, one of the important things which we have committed into our NDCs is to reduce the carbon intensity of our GDP by about 33% by 2030. Now, let's examine this thing mathematically. Basically, what we are saying is we will cut down our carbon dioxide per unit GDP by about 33%. Now, you can slice this term into two components, right? The first term is carbon dioxide per unit energy, primary energy, CO2 over primary energy. And second term is primary energy over GDP, right? So if you simply multiply those two fractions, energy cancels out and you get CO2 over GDP. This is also a variation of what is known as the Kaya identity, named after the famous Japanese scholar who sort of talked about this thing. So the first term refers to the amount of carbon dioxide we are emitting to make 1 unit of primary energy, right? And this is total energy, not just electricity, total energy. How much carbon we emit to make 1 unit of primary energy. So that sort of depends upon the fossil intensity of our economy, how much we are dependent on coal, oil, gas, etc. The second term refers to how much energy we consume to make 1 unit of GDP or energy intensity of our GDP. Right, so that sort of refers to the energy efficiency of our economy. That is, if we take less energy to make 1 unit of GDP, we are more energy efficient and vice versa. So if we want to achieve the NDC, that is the left term, we want to reduce. So we can reduce the left term by a combination of both the terms on the right. Now let's see how each term has behaved in the past. So right now I'm focusing on the first term, which is carbon intensity of our primary energy. Now this is an important graph and I would urge you to just think about it a little bit. This has been continuously increasing. That is the amount of carbon we are emitting to make 1 unit of energy. This has been increasing over the last 25 years. I'm using World Bank data, which is to 2015. But even if I were to take last 5 years data, this would be increasing. And please bear in mind that this is despite all our RE projections of solar, etc. This is an increasing trend. Now, if we were to project this into future, and we did this exercise about a year back, if we were to extrapolate and look at this curve till 2030, my own sense is that this will still be increasing, or at best it might plateau, or it might gradually reach a peak by 2030 time frame. But I don't think it will decrease. And this is despite our RE projections, solar, wind, everything. Why is that so? And the reason for this is, in my view, the following. One is the industry and transport are very, as you know, very strong consumers of oil and also other fossil fuels. And the industry and transport demand is growing fairly high as compared to other sectors. That's one. And second, rural cooking, which till recently used to depend upon biomass, which is carbon neutral, that is gradually shifting over to LPG and PNG and other kind of things, so which are all fossil fuels. As a result, our carbon intensity of our primary energy is gradually, monotonically increasing. The rate might slow down, but in the NDC time frame, I don't think it will decrease. So now, if we need to achieve the NDC target, which is to reduce the carbon intensity of GDP, if this term is continuously increasing, obviously we can achieve NDCs only if the second term is decreasing, right? That is energy over GDP. Now let's see that graph. This graph plots the energy intensity of our GDP. Again, last 25 years of data. And this, as you can see, is the continuously decreasing graph. It sort of accelerated after we announced the national missions for enhanced energy efficiency. Those missions catalyzed our work in energy efficiency with the adoption of energy efficiency policies across large number of sectors. So this sort of puts into context the importance of energy efficiency in meeting our NDC targets. Because unless we, in the NDC time frame, we are able to achieve NDC targets predominantly because of energy efficiency policy interventions. So I thought this is to set the context and highlight why energy efficiency is an incredibly important component in our mix. Second, so that's one. Second, energy efficiency more often than not provides low cost mitigation options. And I'm quoting a very famous graph which McKinsey has developed, which many of you might be familiar with, also called as the marginal abatement cost curves. On the x-axis, they plot the abatement potential in gigatons of carbon per annum. And on the y-axis, they plot the abatement cost, that is dollars per ton of carbon dioxide. Right, so the width of the graph refers to how much carbon you can avoid, whereas the height refers to the cost. Now, one thing you'll notice is that a large number of interventions which are towards the left of the graph are all negative. Right, for example, appliances, HVAC, lighting to LED, things like clinker substitution by fly ash, and all those things. Those are all energy efficiency demand side interventions. Why are they negative? The way they make this MAC curve is that they take an upfront investment which a consumer or the industry has to make, and then they take the annual expenditure. Now, in some cases, the expenditure will be actual outflow. In some cases, it will be savings. In most energy efficient devices, it is savings. If you install an LED, every month you have savings which accrue to your electricity account. So therefore, most energy interventions, energy efficiency interventions have a negative abatement cost, which is evident on the left side. So even though their the width is small, but the cost differential is fairly high. So that's sort of a very standard analysis from the MAC curves. On a personal front, I do have some reservations about the MAC curves. I mean, there are some methodological issues, but by and large, it does provide a good sense of what technologies can do. And finally, if you look forward, this just plots the primary energy in 2030 and how the primary energy can reduce from business as usual to different levels. So as you can see, a significant drop can be achieved by energy efficiency interventions across various sectors. Most important being industry, transport, buildings are the three big sectors by which we can reduce. If we do a similar thing for 2050, the numbers are even more staggering, and we find that almost 25 to 30% of primary energy can be reduced by energy efficiency alone. So this is just to set the context why it is important. We all know, but it is just to reiterate. So now let me take a deep dive into two sectors and share some perspectives on based on what we have done in these two areas. One is industry, and second is cooling. Again, this is you are from CII. You all represent industry sectors, so you know this better than me. But as we know, given the way our GDP is expected to grow, industrial output is tipped to increase 3 to 5 times in most sectors by mid-century. And I'm quoting numbers which have been quoted by the industry associations. For example, steel, today our output is about 125, 130 million tons. Most estimates peg this to increase to about 400 to 500 million tons by mid-century. Cement, we are at about 500, and that's expected to increase to about 1,500, 3 times by mid-century. And likewise, if you look at aluminium, chlor-alkali, textiles, the various sectors, outputs significantly higher. I am picking these two because these are the two most energy-intensive sectors. The other challenge which this poses is that industry is a big consumer of coal. Right? So this pie chart shows the current coal consumption. Obviously, electricity accounts for about 65%, but the balance is industry. So imagine, even if we were to decarbonize electricity totally by solar and wind, etc., still there will be a large chunk of emissions which will be left behind, which will be industry emissions. And this number will only increase as we go along. In the previous slide, I talked about 4 to 5 times increase. So if we were to project this in 20 years, 30 years from now, we are looking at 4 to 5 times the current emission levels just by consumption of coal and other fossil fuels. This plot highlights what I just mentioned. So let me take a minute to explain this graph. The blue bars refer to the present emission levels, right? The blue one refers to present emissions from electricity, industry, and transport. The orange bars refer to a reference scenario in 2050 in which we don't do much. The grayish bar refers to what if we were to do aggressive decarbonization, right? Now look at electricity. In electricity, if we were to really go all out to eliminate coal and entirely rely on renewables, it's possible to decarbonize totally with a combination of solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, etc. We can totally decarbonize. Industry, the yellow bar itself assumes that all future industry adopts best practices in energy efficiency. So even with the best practices in energy efficiency, we are looking at about 2.5 billion tons of emissions from industry. So that's an important takeaway point, that even with the best practices in energy efficiency, we are looking at about 2.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide in 2050. Now, if we were to look at various interventions, and we'll talk about that, we might be able to bring this number down to less than a billion by various interventions. So as Mr. Venkatgiri mentioned, in the first phase of our PAT program, first phase in the last 10 years, in the PAT program, we relied heavily on the market-based mechanisms to improve our energy efficiency of various industries through steel, cement, petrochemicals, fertilizers, and chloralkali, aluminum, mainly through the market-based mechanisms. It led to significant gains in terms of both energy saved and carbon dioxide avoided. Today, as the graph on the right shows, this is the specific electricity consumption of Indian cement industries. As you can see, we are much better than the world average. And most of the recent cement manufacturing plants are actually world class in terms of their energy efficiency. They are, absolutely top class. So cement is one area where we have done really well, and we are confident that going forward, most plants will be adhering to the best standards. Of course, there is scope for improvement in steel. We have a mix of steel plants. Some are very good, some are laggards in terms of energy efficiency. Our specific energy consumption on an average in steel is still a bit higher as compared to many other countries, despite the improvements in under PAT program. So what I'm trying to say here is that in the last 10 years, we have done very well in PAT. At the same time, we should also be cognizant that possibly we have realized large part of the energy efficiency gains. There are still pockets where work needs to be done, especially in SMEs and also in sectors like steel. But largely, energy efficiency gains seem to be, have been realized. And you know this much better than I do because you represent industry. There is a limit to what energy efficiency can do. Soon we hit the thermodynamic limits. So we seem to be saturating in many sectors. So next phase, going forward. Now remember the previous slide where I said that industry emissions will touch about 2.5 billion tons in 2050. And that is despite the best energy efficiency improvements. So how do we mitigate that? My own submission is that next phase is going to be much harder. A lot of the good gains which we accomplished in the last 10 years were great, but I think we need to be prepared for a harder next 10, 20 years to mitigate about 2.5 billion tons. And there we'll need to look at things such as reduce demand of products, circularity, fuel switch, shifting to electrification, new technologies such as green hydrogen, CCS. I put 3 big question marks because I don't understand whether CCS is possible or not, whether it is technically, economically viable. I don't know honestly. But that's one option being talked about, so I put there. And energy efficiency, of course, the residual sectors like SMEs and some other sectors. But we'll have to focus on collection of all of these to look at the next phase of industrial transition. And this is an example which I've taken from a recent report by TERI, where they examined the low carbon steel sector, and Shakti supported this report. So let's look at steel emissions in a business as usual scenario, where we continue with the current trend, and there we end up at about 800 million tons of carbon dioxide by mid-century. If we were to improve the efficiency of our steel manufacturing, make sure that it adheres to the global best standards, that 800 comes down to about 700. So yes, there are residual gains to be made, but again, there is a limit. We can reduce by about 100 million tons by mid-century. What if we were to do resource efficiency, recycling, and all kind of things, where we reduce the commodity demand itself so that we manufacture less steel? In that case, we can bring down the 800 to about, say, 500. So I would say that is really the limit with the current set of steel manufacturing technologies, which mainly rely on blast furnace, which uses coke in the blast furnace. So if we really want to get to zero or close to zero, we will have to look at technologies which include hydrogen's use in the blast furnace to eliminate the use of coke or coal in the blast furnace. That looks like what is emerging from this analysis. And I understand that many European manufacturers are experimenting hydrogen in pilot plants and at lab level or at pilot level. And so this does provide a pointer to which way the industry might be headed in future. So with that, that is a summary of what we discussed in industry. Let me give you some flavor of the space cooling and why this is an incredibly important sector in about 10 minutes, and then I'll stop for question and answers. This graph I think, summarizes the need or the importance of this sector. This basically shows the global stock of air conditioners from now to 2050. Right? So India is a yellow band. If you look at today's scenario, that is 2020 or so, that yellow band is barely visible. We are a very small consumption of we are a small fraction of global stock of air conditioners. Whereas in 2050, by all projections, it is tipped to account for about 20 or 25% of global stock. That's a very staggering number, considering the population base we have. In fact, today, about 8% of India's households have ACs. That number is expected to increase to 50 or 60% by mid-century. So you can imagine the staggering growth that we're looking at. And if you add to the fact that we are looking at more and more intense summers and heats, it only makes the case that much stronger. In fact, I recently attended a talk given by Mr. Chandra Bhushan of iForest, and he made a very nice statement that cooling is no longer a luxury. In fact, when we were growing up during my childhood days, we could never imagine an air conditioner. It was totally unaffordable. Even a home cooler was a luxury. The one home cooler system. But now, with the kind of summers we are having, I would say cooling is a necessity, not a luxury anymore. So the strong increase in the air conditioning demand obviously presents a very high increase in the energy. And this is a study by Brookings, where they estimated the residential appliance energy consumption by 2030 as compared to 2015. So the numbers are staggering. You can see the lighting number drops by 50%, and that is because we are switching from incandescent or CFLs to LEDs. And as Mr. Saurabh Kumar would have pointed out, he's the man behind Ujala. The LEDs are a very important factor in the decline of energy. But what is unmistakable is the nearly 10-fold increase in energy demand of air conditioning from 2015 till 2030. Gross terawatt hours. So this is the scale of problem we are looking at. It's not only gross energy, it's also the load curve. And I'm taking this graph which Mr. Ganesh Srinivasan from Tata Power Distribution Limited shared with me, and shows the peak load in Delhi, in some parts of Delhi, which come under TPDDL. The orange line is the peak load in 2010, 10 years back. The blue one is the peak load this year, right? So what you can make out is that we have two very sharp peaks. One is the afternoon peak, which is largely commercial, industrial, and that driven by that. What is important is there is a very strong and sharp night peak. That's when the domestic air conditioners come online and they run through the night. So we have a very strong continuous peak in the night at about 2000 megawatts in this area, which comes under TPDDL. The take-home message is here is that not only are we leading to gross increase in energy, but we are also leading to peak demand. And this is a very strong deterrent to renewables, because at least as far as solar goes, solar can help meet the afternoon peak, but solar can't help the night peak. So this only highlights the need for to address this problem of reducing the cooling demand, reducing the energy demand from cooling by efficient appliances as much as possible. Even if you can reduce it by 500 megawatts in this region, that's equivalent to one coal power plant. And I'm quoting this one graph which Professor Charles Warringham, an Australian academic and scholar, he very graciously shared with me, highlights the point. On July 7th this year, we hit a peak in India. We hit a peak load of 200 gigawatts. Our power minister also acknowledged this thing. The first time India's peak demand touched 200 gigawatts. And a large part of this can be attributed to the fact that it was an extremely hot day, July 7th. Those who live in Delhi NCR will know that it was an extremely hot day and temperatures are touching very high. So Professor Warringham plotted the daily maximum temperature with the peak demand in, I think, Delhi NCR region. And there was a rough trend which emerges of the correlation between the two. So this only highlights the need for energy efficiency and need to address cooling demand. Now, what can be done? Now we have, this graph highlights the average energy efficiency rating, watt of cooling per watt of energy consumed across various countries. And this is adjusted for the seasonal variations across the various countries. So if you just focus on the orange horizontal bar, that is the market average. So in India, the market average is somewhere around 3 watts per watt, right? Of course, we have a wide variation, but the market average is about 3 watts per watt. Whereas if you compare that with countries like US, it's about 4, China is little more than 4, Korea about 5, Japan around 5, and so on and so forth. So most of the ACs sold in India have an SEER of about 3 watts per watt of SEER. So there's a lot of room for us to improve the energy efficiencies of the ACs sold in India. And as you saw in the previous graph, if we are able to improve the energy efficiency of the ACs sold, we can significantly bring down the peak and also the gross energy consumption. But so how do we expedite the adoption of 5-star ACs? How do we ensure that we go even beyond 5-star to more efficient ones, which are available in other countries? Obviously, cost is a big deterrent. And I'm sure, as Saurav must have spoken in his earlier seminar, EESL has various options or models to reduce the cost of the appliances, but challenge still remains in adoption. There are various ways by which we can bring down the upfront capital cost, consumers can pay as you save, etc. But I think a lot more needs to be done to ensure adoption than what we have done so far, and at a much faster pace, because market is increasing at a very fast pace, whereas the adoption of policies has always lagged behind. The other challenge with air conditioning and space cooling is the the refrigerants. And this is, I suppose, known to all of you, that the refrigerants which we use in our cooling systems are either HCFCs or HFCs. And in some cases, we have done the hydrocarbons or R290. So under Montreal Protocol, we have progressively moved away from this. We have completely phased out CFCs. We are on the verge of phasing out HCFCs, but HFCs are currently the bulk of the refrigerants being used in India. There are a few notable exceptions, such as the Godrej air conditioners, which use the hydrocarbons such as propane or R290, which have very low GWP, but HFCs continue to be the bulk of the refrigerants. Now, as we go forward, the Kigali Amendment to Montreal Protocol talks about the need to reduce HFCs by over 80%. There have been estimates, and this will surprise you, that if we fix cooling, then by end of century, either through the adoption of super efficient refrigerators and by the use of low GWP refrigerants, we will save at least 0.4 or 0.5 degree temperature increase if we are able to manage cooling properly. And therefore, there have been the Kigali Amendment. There is the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Plan, which is a global philanthropic initiative, and the India Cooling Action Plan to reduce the cooling demand, reduce refrigerant demand, and reduce cooling energy demand. But it's not easy. As I said, as of now, bulk of our industry is heavily dependent on HFCs. How do we make sure we gradually phase out HFCs and bring in the low GWP refrigerants like natural refrigerants and not-in-kind technologies? So there are options to eliminate HFCs, relying on natural refrigerants such as ammonia, carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, HFOs. There are a whole bunch of NIK technologies which are different from the conventional vapor compression cycle, but there are challenges to adoption. I would recommend for those interested, there were a set of very nice reports published by iForest, Mr. Chandra Bhushan's organization, where they highlighted these technical barriers, economic barriers, and looked at policy interventions for adoption of these measures. Finally, this is my summary slide. There is enormous unrealized potential for energy efficiency, especially in sectors such as industry, cooling, and even buildings. We have done great work in last 15 years. I would suggest a lot of low-hanging fruits have been tapped, and a lot of credit goes to industry for industry reciprocated to the government's initiatives and did really well in these initiatives. But we have a much harder challenge ahead of us, especially in industry and coolings, to realize the goals. So with that, I'll stop and would be most happy to have any questions and discussions. Thank you so much.